Welcome to the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the Pearl of the Orient. Shanghai is the city of the future. All systems go, full steam ahead. It never stops. Technology, innovation, ambition. It's everywhere. Join us as we explore this new world and talk to the people making it happen. The Tech in Shanghai podcast. The future is now.
All right, we are back with the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the podcast dedicated to bringing you everything tech and startup from the great city of Shanghai, told through the eyes of the people on the ground making it happen. I'm your host, John Vallis, and last week on the show we had Liam Winston, who is one of the founders of Mobile Now Group, doing some really interesting work in the mobile industry here in China. We spoke a lot about social media, and the landscape here in China. So if you're interested in that field, certainly check out last week's podcast and everything Liam had to say. Now, today we're very lucky to have Pascal Coppens, the managing director of LetsFace. LetsFace is a very interesting company who digitizes events here in Shanghai and actually in several other cities in the world, as I'm sure we'll get into. They've secured notable clients as well as some interesting VC rounds. All of that we'll get into, but again, I won't butcher the intro. I'll let Pascal describe LetsFace in more detail. So Pascal, thanks for coming on the show today, and why don't you tell us a little bit about LetsFace, what you guys do, who you do it for, and the status of the company.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here today. Just maybe explain very shortly about the setup of LetsFace, which is about 4 years ago in 2009, set it up. Really what we're doing as a company is to digitize events. So it's a simple concept, but if you look at the event industry in general, most of it is actually still done very traditional. So there's not a lot of technology being used in the event world, while in other areas, like sales, marketing, or HR, you see a lot of systems there to help people to make it more efficient. The event world is still run a little bit traditional, like it used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I believe that LetsFace is very well positioned to make that standard and make that change in the industry so that any agency, PR agency, event agency, or even organizers of event could use one environment to develop their whole event from start to the finish. And that's the whole idea of LetsFace.
Okay. Now, I know we spoke about some of these things before the show. I'd like to revisit some of them, but you know, for listeners who might not have an idea of the landscape here in Shanghai, I mean, this is what this whole show is about, is giving them a little bit of insight into how things work here. I mean, having lived here for how many years now yourself?
Well, about 12, 13 years, came to China first time in 96. So.
All right. Well, I've only been here since 2009, so relative newbie. But, you know, it seems like events are almost a daily occurrence, or perhaps multiples a day. You know, it's just, as with everything in Shanghai and in China right now, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of companies vying for position and branding and accessing the market that exists here. So am I right, first of all, in that assumption? And second of all, is that one of the reasons why LetsFace has decided to focus on Shanghai, or is there other reasons?
No, I think, I mean, there's a few reasons, but you're totally correct with saying that Shanghai and China in general, but Shanghai definitely is one of the top spaces in the world, I would say, for events. I mean, there's events pretty much every hour, anywhere, in any hotel or any location. So it's really the place to be. But also what's important for an entrepreneur like me is to look at size. And most of the events in China are actually much bigger and larger than many places in the world. So it gives you, as an entrepreneur, an opportunity to try out on a larger scale new products, new ideas. And in China has a very typical market acceptance of new things. It's really more a budget and money issue than it is actually an innovation issue here in China.
Interesting. And I mean, we've spoken before on the podcast about the adoption of social media and technology in general by the Chinese population, and how they've kind of leapfrogged the step of having, you know, laptops and such as we have in the West. They went from not really having a connection to the internet or a technological interface to having smartphones and really, really engaging in them. Is that something, given the work that you guys do, is that something that's, first of all, hugely important, but also a great circumstance here in China because people are so willing to engage in their mobile platforms and mobile media?
Yes, and it's not just mobile. I mean, mobile is, of course, the most personal device to engage with. But even if you, and that's a difference we want to make, is when you're in an event, it's more about the social engagement, not just the individual engagement. And you can see that the Chinese audience or guests at events are really very excited to do things like lucky draws and other really cool engagement products that they can use on site. It's for me very important to make that difference, because I feel that a lot of the products that are being used or things that are being displayed or deployed at events is a lot about the bells and whistles that I call, like the circus acts. But it's actually more about the social engagement that we need to use technology for to help happen.
Right.
And I see that happening in China. Now, just to log on to that, it's also we're also in Europe now. And we have an office there, and I see that same engagement happening. The only difference is it takes much longer time. You need to be more cautious on what you do.
Right.
But it's definitely not just a China thing.
Right. I mean, I think the type of technology that you deliver to your clients certainly would be engaging anywhere. It's just, again, as in so many things in China, there was a void there for so long, and it seems like the curiosity level is certainly higher here than perhaps anywhere in the world. But in terms of the actual result of using a service or a platform like LetsFace, can you compare kind of the results that would come for one of your clients that use your platform versus a traditional event kind of marketing agency approach?
Well, there's a few things. One of the things is purely if you look at event management. If you go to an event, you have to pre-register. That's just the start. And then usually that's not the most exciting part of the event. It's something that actually can be engaging. It's just nobody's actually doing it, or very few are. Then once you are at the event, your first impression that you get of the event is usually long lines, waiting, trying to find your name on a piece of paper, looking around. Maybe there's a band there playing, but that's about it. And the band, you've seen it 1,000 times.
Right.
So there's no real engagement happening at the pre-phase of the event, and that already loses the attraction of a lot of guests at that point. And so you have to make up for that at the event, which isn't really needed. So with LetsFace, what we can do is actually any point at the event to make it a lot more fun, even though it's considered an operational, practical, logistic part of the event.
Right.
The second thing that I think is very different with LetsFace is that we look at every part of the event, whether it's a pre-registration or whether it's like a survey or it's anything that could be an animation at the event. We look at it as a sensor. So for us, it's a way to capture data. So the brand actually knows what people like, what people want to do, so they can improve their events over time. That means you get you can calculate your return on investment,
Right?
because you really capture what people are doing. Most of the technology used today at events aren't capturing that data and doing something with it, not analyzing it.
And does LetsFace provide its clients with analytics on that data?
Yes, we do. Yes, on I mean both the pre-registration, registration, as well as the entertainment, and also the pushing to the social media afterwards. So it's the whole flow, and that analytics really helps to manage future events better. Yes.
So does that lead in directly to future events with the same company, or do you have follow-on services that help them integrate what they've learned and the data they collected from these events toward branding their company and engaging further in their or with their customers outside of the events?
Yes, we have a little bit of different view than many event technology solutions out there. Is that I personally believe that that events is all about community and social engagement, and so it's usually linked to a brand or an organization that is considered a brand. So I think it's very important that brand positions themselves at the event. So all our products are always branded or white labeled, like you say. But this means that we actually push the brand information to the client. So we're behind the scenes always. So I think that's a little bit a different way of looking at it than normal. So the data that comes out to that is actually going to the brand and to no one else.
Right.
So we're actually trying to help individual brands to increase their event experience over time and results.
Now, would LetsFace, given what you just described, do you have a typical client that a typical industry that you work with? Is there an ideal client? Because obviously there's all sorts of different events. How many are which are the ones that are most applicable to LetsFace, and which have you kind of directed your efforts towards?
Well, the event world is quite large.
Right.
There's things from, they call it the MICE industry: meetings, incentives, conference, and exhibition.
Okay.
Then you have things like brand events. You have corporate events. You have parties. You have sports events, music events, cultural events, art events. It's endless. So we've done a little bit of everything, but our focus has really been on trade fairs and top brand or premium brand events.
Okay.
So it's kind of an odd combination, but I've made that conscious decision because both of these industries are actually in need of what the other industry is very good at.
Right.
The trade fair industry is really in need of more engagement. It's usually pretty boring, if I may say so.
Sure.
And when you look at the event, the brand events, it's very engaging, but they don't always look at data and management in the same way. So by doing those two industries, we can help both industries to get better.
Right. And it seems almost like you focus on one strength of LetsFace for the one and the other strength for the other. And I understand the brand industry, of course, and the branded events. Can you speak a little bit more about the trade fair? Because like you said, trade fairs are exceedingly boring occasionally,
Yes.
and they happen 10 times a day here in China, so there's certainly no shortage. In terms of, if I was someone organizing a trade fair here, in working with LetsFace, what am I hoping to accomplish above and beyond what I generally am able to do?
Well, the trade fair industry in general is quite challenged in competition with the online industry, Alibaba and others.
Sure.
So they have to find ways to actually attract visitors to come and also to engage them on site. A lot of trade fairs is really about the promotion of the trade fair. It's also about the networking on site, so usually between buyer and seller. And then it's also about the content, which is often conferences and extra information. So all of these can get help from technology to improve it. Promotion is obvious, like social media, RSVPs, like I say, which are more engaging. Think about a kind of a LinkedIn for trade fairs. So you recommend your friend to go to a trade fair. That's kind of the direction you have to think of.
Right.
If you're on site, then how can you make that whole trip more effective? Because usually people go to a trade fair, they stay there like a whole day, see 100, 200, 300 booths, and at the end of the day, they can't really remember what they did and what was the most efficient. So how can you make that more efficient? Do a matchmaking system, but also engage more on site. And then on the conference and content, it's also about providing the information in a more interactive way.
Right.
Most of the people never find their way to the conferences because they're too busy talking to actually the people on the booths itself.
Sure. I mean, it certainly seems like an industry that's ripe for an infusion of technology like LetsFace is providing, because it's one of those industries, like you mentioned, that's kind of on the decline as a result of things like Alibaba and other things like it. And it just seems like it's lacking that something. There's still certainly a role for it, but it's lacking, as you said, efficiency, interaction, engagement. Yep. So, I'd be interested in attending an event that was using the software.
No, and it's not just about the software. It's actually the whole, so we use tablets, we use interactive screens, we use big LED screens. So it's really about the displays and the experience on site. And I believe that trade fairs, conferences in general, people are going to go more and more to them for the experience rather than purely to connect with people.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're probably right there. And does LetsFace have, when you work with a client, do you send out a large number of staff for every event to operate these things, or do you train your clients to operate them for themselves?
It's a very interesting question, because we went from A to B. So basically we started off having our own staff and servicing the events itself. And the main reason was that before we had service staff, it was very difficult to get clients. Right. So our first clients expected a total solution. So it's not just a check-in, we also need the hostesses and everything around it, and even the flyers and so on. So, but then as we became bigger and bigger and did more and more events, we started finding partners that would want to take on that role. And so we're actually qualifying these partners. trying to work with partners that we know can do a good job.
Are these agency partners, like
yes,
events agencies?
Events agencies, or it could be a hostess company, or it could be a model company if you need models. I mean, there's or IT company to provide Wi-Fi support. But we still have people in-house that actually support them, and it's kind of like an internal service center for these companies.
Right. And so am I to understand then that the learning curve for setting up the LetsFace experience at a given event, at a client event, is not that steep? I mean, it's rather intuitive, and once things are set up, they're rather easily to organize and then engage in?
Well, the biggest challenge, I would say, is the internet. And so most of the locations...
Common problem here.
Yes, most of the locations in China and even in Shanghai don't have proper internet. You would be surprised, a 5-star hotel not having proper internet, but it does happen. And so I think that's where we really need to qualify that this is okay, and that's where we will spend time on it. But otherwise, yes, there's a lot of opportunity to work with people and get it done quickly. The learning curve is not that steep, but there is one problem there, is that most of the clients want the latest products, or at least one of the latest, and usually that is less mature than the others, and that's where you need more service.
I see. Okay. Now, on your website, you mentioned that you work with clients and develop exquisite ideas to deliver them the service that you guys provide, and deliver them solutions that could dramatically enhance the face of their events and engage their potential customers more. Can you elaborate on that a bit, on what you mean by exquisite ideas and how that works?
Well, so I call the company a creative engineering company, which pretty much means that we have a creative team and an engineering team, and I value them equally, which means that whenever a client comes to us and they say, we have a specific problem, we will then actually talk together with the creative team of the client, the agency very often, and come up with a new experience that could come out of it. One of the examples we did, one of our latest products that we're releasing soon, is an award ceremony product. Most award ceremonies, somebody gets an award and then they stand on stage and they maybe speak for a few minutes, but it's not a very engaging experience. So we were talking with this particular event agency, how can we change that? And that's when we came up, we should have the audience be able to push like a Twitter wall, but all personalized information and congratulations, even fireworks, champagne, whatever bottles that open on the big screen behind them. So it becomes an engaging experience for the users in the event.
Right.
And for the speaker, it becomes interesting because now he has a track record of who actually congratulated him.
Sure.
So that kind of thing comes out of a discussion with a creative team in one of our clients.
I see. I mean, it's so interesting how, things like you just said, discussing with a client and coming up with ideas, how LetsFace and technology in general can make those ideas a reality and have events happen in real time and engage people both in the real world and on their technological and social media platforms, just to enrich the entire experience and provide greater connectivity. I mean, it's something that's very exciting to see what's going to happen in the future. But that being said, every business has their core money-making business and the areas where they can stretch a little and be a little creative and innovative. Now, hopefully there's a balance between both. But as you were just discussing, I mean, how often when you do meet a client do you try to push your bread and butter, income earning services versus developing a solution for that client, bespoke solution for that client?
Yeah, that's a tough one because in general, yes, if this is an issue because of the industry in itself. The event industry is a service industry. So if an event agency, PR agency, or big agency wants to do an event, they consider suppliers as service providers. So they don't look at it as products. They look at it, this is what I have as cool idea. Can you develop this for me?
Right.
Well, we want to build products because if you don't build products, ultimately, first of all, your lead time is quite long. Secondly, it costs much more money because you have to start developing it.
Sure.
And there's always the risk that you won't make it or it breaks at the event, which is terrible. So products make the whole experience of the event a lot better. But so there's that balance between telling the clients, this is what we have, this is what you want, and how are we going to go from A to B and still have that same experience?
Right.
as we have more products and more clients, of course, we get more standard products that are being requested because there's still only a few % of the brands that are really leading in new experiences, and many others, they actually like what has been used before, just change the key visuals or change a little bit the features, and,
Sure.
and you're fine.
And among those clients, I mean, I can certainly see one client saying, I want the solution that's proven to work, that you've used in the past. That's excuse me, that's what I'd like to use for the event, versus the client that, you know, is a little more pushing of the boundaries and saying, I want something really interesting, unique, and innovative for this event. Is there a percentage in terms of the what the clients ask you for? Are they more towards the stable, proven services?
Actually, no. To be honest, every client wants something new and innovative,
Sure.
and so how it goes, it usually starts from, we want to do something really cool, really exciting. This is some ideas, or do you have any ideas? And then we have to talk about budgets. And once the budgets kicks in, then, or that discussion starts, then basically they go quickly to standard products.
Right.
And so it's just a way of trying to show that what you have done actually can excite people to a maximum already. But yes, it's challenging in the beginning.
Sure.
Over time, it's easier.
Now, I imagine this, you know, the service you guys provide or the experience you provide is very new to a lot of the customers and clients you'd be working with. You know, without just saying, oh, they all love it, what's the general reaction that your clients have after an event is over? They've seen how their customers have engaged with your experience and with your service, and they've also got all that data at the end of it. What generally is their feedback?
Well, usually they come back, which means that somebody liked it. But we also have, I mean, this is an internal process of our project team. We have an evaluation form, and so we want to make sure. I mean, form, it's actually digital. We couldn't make it paper. But we have an evaluation process, and we ask the client afterwards what they thought about it. And we get pretty good scores on many things. Usually when somebody's less excited, it's probably because one of the products did not work particularly for that type of events. But we've had other events where it works better. And so we're learning as well as we go.
Right.
And so besides products, we're offering many more advice to the clients today about what we believe will work or will not work at their events.
Right. Having so much experience in past events.
Yes. It just builds up.
Now, as is the case so often with startups, you know, you hear of startups having to pivot. You know, they had their initial idea on what their service should be and what the problem that they're trying to solve is. And then as they developed and grew and accessed a given market, they realized that, you know, they had to change a bit what their service was, or they maybe misjudged what the problem was, and they had to pivot a little bit. Did LetsFace encounter that, or from the get-go, did you know what problem you were solving?
Unfortunately, I did have to change, but it's a good change in a way, because it's we were originally focused on a different market. So we started, we wanted to do event software, but we started in clubs, like fitness clubs and all kinds of sports clubs. And we thought that would work. The issue we encountered in China is that most fitness club owners don't really want their guests to come often, so they actually want just to sell the fitness memberships.
Right.
So it was more of a promotion market than it was actually an engagement and community market. So that's when we started doing events ourselves, just to prove that the concept worked. And it worked. And then it dawned on me just after a year or two, like, maybe we should target event companies instead of targeting the locations.
Right.
So we actually changed from locations to agencies. So that's a pretty big change.
Sure.
It doesn't change from the product point of view and the vision point of view. It's just a change in target. And so, yes, we changed. And then the first pivot that we really had was when we were asked for a trade fair, and we checked in 8,000 people with tablets. And it went very smooth, and everybody was super excited. And it had never been done before in China on that size. And we got noticed, and that's when we started having all the backlog of products that we built, getting interested in the event industry.
Wow. So, and I noticed from some of your social media outlets that you've worked with some pretty notable companies here in China. You've worked with Chow Tai Fook, which I believe
That was last week, yes.
Which I believe is a large jewelry store chain here in China, perhaps the biggest in Asia.
I believe so.
One of the
yes,
biggest.
yes.
And you've worked with the Beijing, a prominent a magazine in Beijing. Can you let us know some other clients that you've worked with, and then after that, how you go about securing them? I'm sure some come to you, but do you prospect at all for clients? And
Yes.
if so, how?
Well, it's of course very different from trade fair and the brand industry. So talking about the premium brands, which you mentioned, in general, we work through an agency. So like Chow Tai Fook or the Beijinger, that was a smaller event, which we did directly for them. But actually there was, for Chow Tai Fook, there was a PR agency involved. And for most of the events we do, like Adidas, did Nike, we've worked with Mercedes, a lot of BMW and that kind of big brand names. It's 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, it's actually an event agency or PR agency that we work with closely.
Right.
But we're often also in contact with the brand, but then it's more about the data, not so much about the products, because the brand want ultimately their data in and data out, so the analytics.
And do you provide that to the agency after an event, and then they put it in their package, they deliver to their client, or do you provide it directly to the brand?
Well, that's where we have an event management system, and so we can give access to anyone who is allowed to get access. So the brand could request not for the agency not to have it to have it, or the agency could manage internally who gets access and who not.
Right.
So, yeah.
So primarily your prospecting or lack thereof is via relationships with agencies, and they bring to you, projects and clients that they've secured. So the LetsFace doesn't spend too much time, on sales and prospecting.
No, we actually do spend quite some time on sales, but the sales is usually going to either the organizers of the event, which could be an agency or could be a trade fair organizer, conference organizer. This is all possible. Or to keep the relationship with the agency so they don't forget you when they have a new project, because they have projects every day.
Sure.
And so it's good that they think about you, because very often, because of the number of products we have now, they think about you, but they forget about the fact that you have one product that would fit that event.
Right.
And so we do need to keep on constantly selling. But these days, I think over 50%, if I'm not mistaken, of agencies actually contact us directly for new projects.
So you're beginning to build a fairly good reputation on the scene here.
Yes.
Now with agencies, before we move on, do you ever come up against, some of the larger agencies offer in-house solutions, not the same as LetsFace, but they attempt at a similar concept, which is customer engagement at events and data collection and things like that. Is that something that you combat when pitching or working with agencies, that they might have their own in-house solutions for that sort of thing?
Sure, it happens. Either they have their in-house digital team that can develop some simpler applications, or they will look for a digital partner to provide a custom application for the event. Let's put it differently. Their event has to happen, whether LetsFace delivers the product or not. So they have to look around for solutions. That does not mean that for us it's always difficult to convince them to work with us, but it really depends on time and budgets and expectation. If it's too much of a service-directed product, then they might go and do something themselves, because it's not reusable.
I see.
If it's much more going in the direction of standardizations, then it often makes sense to work with us.
Okay. So as we just said, you guys have just last week finished an event for Chow Tai Fook, which is a very high-profile, huge brand here. Through our discussion prior to the show, it seemed like things were really moving forward with LetsFace. I want to shift now, if we can, to talking a little bit about the experience of setting up a company here in Shanghai in China, and then also where you guys are right now in terms of funding, in terms of expansion plans. We touched on it a bit briefly before, but can you tell us, kind of where you guys are at?
Yeah, right now we're from a funding point of view. So it's the Series A that we secured about a year ago. So we grew the company from, let's say, 10 people to about 30, 35 right now.
Wow.
If you include the 2 new offices that we opened last year. We now have 3 offices, opening a 4th one this year. We have an office in Beijing. with a handful of people. We also have an office in Belgium, because what turned out is that most of our clients in China are global clients. Many of them are European clients. They liked what we did here, and now they're asking if we can do things back home in Germany, in France, in Holland, in UK. Right. And so we've decided to set up an office in Belgium, because that's where I'm from, and it makes it center of Europe still quite easy to manage the European market from there. My next goal is to actually secure a Series B or a next round of funding, which I'm actively pursuing already for 6 months, right. For building primarily the European markets, secondly the US market.
Right. And what's the, we talk about securing VC rounds. In terms of the cash flow position of the company, are you guys able to stand alone as a business, and VC is more of a funding expansion, or how does that dynamic work for you guys right now?
Well, yeah. So the interesting thing about funding, I mean, this is the third time that we raise, I mean, twice a seed funding and then now a Series A, is that you always become profitable just before actually needing the money to expand. So right now we're still in the phase that we're almost profitable because we've expanded from 10 to 35 people. Right. So the expense gone up a lot, and we're pretty much reaching it as I speak. And then now we want to go to a next expansion, and then for the next year we'll be losing money again, but we'll pretty much, it's called an investment. Right. So yes, no, that's we could stand on our own easily. We've done it 2 times in the past. But for me, it's more about investing to scale. To scale, yes. Right.
Now, you mentioned setting up a few other offices around the world. Is Shanghai still the focus for LetsFace? I mean, it's got the largest presence in terms of staff by a long shot. Do you see a long-term, that Shanghai would be the long-term headquarters and center of business for LetsFace, or is it seeming like there's a lot of interest coming out of Belgium, Europe, and other places?
Well, the clients definitely are not all in Shanghai. The big challenge with big brands is that the decision is often taken in New York or in London, and then they globally will roll out a program. So we will need to be closer to our clients from a sales and marketing point of view, also a little bit from project point of view. But when it comes to the development of the products, the ideas, and the size of the market, China, in my view, will always be the center. Right. And one of the interesting things about China is actually that you can easily test new things, which I said before. Which you don't have in Belgium because it takes a long time.
Is that because of the enthusiasm of everyone who gets in front of the experience of LetsFace?
I think it's also because everybody's in China trying to find his own way to be different.
Right.
And so everybody wants to take a chance. As long as they can afford it, it's okay.
Now, we spoke before the show again about the difference between foreign clients, foreign businesses, and Chinese clients and customers. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? Why LetsFace, is at least at this stage in the company, working more with foreign funded or foreign owned companies, and kind of what the barriers to working with more Chinese customers are, and how you guys are approaching that moving forward?
Well, for us, there's a few reasons, but working with global companies, I would say Fortune 500 type companies, makes it a little bit easier for us. The reason is that they really, it's more about a long-term partnership that they're trying to find with a lot of these clients. They value a lot of the data, which is not always valued by Chinese clients in the same way. And then also it's, and that's a strategic decision, is that it's easier to convince a Chinese client to follow a foreign brand than the other way around. So now that we have secured quite a lot of foreign brands and done events with it, it's quite easy for us now to sell to Chinese brands, right? Because they liked what they saw.
Sure. Yeah. Now, in terms of the experience of working with these clients, now I don't want you to get yourself in trouble here, but when we talk about working with foreign multinational brands versus local Chinese brands, when you have that meeting, that creative meeting, that business planning session, where you talk about what you're going to deliver, how you're going to deliver it, what's going to come out of the back end, is there any difference between what the two are focusing on, what they want from it? You mentioned that they're not so data heavy, but is it a more difficult process with one or the other?
I would say more difficult. I think it's different. With foreign clients, let's say they have very often more a stronger opinion and idea about what they want, which is great. In innovation, you can come up with new ideas together and so on. But on the Chinese client side, which is also a great thing, is they listen more to your advice. So what that means is that it's you get more a soundboard from one, but on the other hand, you're the soundboard. So it's just a different way of working with different types of clients. Now, this said, I think most of our foreign clients actually manage projects by local Chinese people here on site. So it's a combination very often.
Right.
So you get, and definitely some of the more local brands, they are trying to find ways to differentiate themselves. It's just more like a discussion rather than this is what I want and what you think about it.
Because I have this perhaps mistaken view that Chinese companies are so cash rich at the moment that they just want the best solution available. And in a meeting like that, now, I'm sure this isn't the case. I know it's much harder than this, but I just see them being like, well, we'll take your top service. Thank you very much. And we'll see how it goes. Is there any truth to that? Are the Chinese brands more, kind of have larger budgets for something like this? Or is that just...
Yeah, I think the budgets are larger in general. Not always, but that doesn't mean that they spend more money.
Right.
Very often they just do more events. And so it's a different way of spending the budget. And the challenge with that budget is that Chinese purchasing departments, for example, are very conscious about the price of everything. And so although they have maybe larger budgets, they're very, very selective in spending money on specific services.
They try to do more with those budgets.
Yes, well, and also if you do a check-in, even if you do it really cool and interesting, and they still compare you with a traditional check-in.
Right.
And so you need to match somehow that budget. Otherwise, they're wondering, is that where we should innovate?
Right, I see. Okay, so again, I want to shift up a bit to the experience of living and working in Shanghai. You've been here for 12 years?
Something like that, yes.
So in China years, that's about 100 years in terms of the change that has probably gone on during that time. What's it like? What was it like to first begin working in China, and how has it changed, and what is it like now?
Well, it's changing every day, so it's hard to keep track of all the changes. But I believe that when I first came, the big difference that it is with now is that people were much more interested to learn from me. Now I'm actually learning a lot from my clients, including Chinese local clients, and that was because they are a lot of the dynamics here. It's all about improvement and change, and that is something that I think they now have a better grasp on how to get somewhere, or people actually believe that they know how to get there. And so the discussion becomes different. Before it was more like a teacher-student relationship. Now it's more a peer-to-peer relationship, which I think is a good evolution in China.
Sure. And what about your life, maybe away from the startup scene? How has it changed? Obviously, there's a lot more amenities for foreigners living here now than there probably was 12 years ago. Although the pollution issue might have gotten worse. Why do you like living in Shanghai? Why do you choose to stay here? If you do. I don't
no,
make any
I
assumptions
do.
here.
No, I do. Pollution is, of course, one of the challenges. So aside that problem, no, I believe China is just such a unique environment to actually grow business in. And that is because of that change, that opportunity. It's really about finding constantly, as an entrepreneur, it's an environment where you have to challenge yourself every day. And I like that. And you don't have to do it alone. There's a lot of people around you that actually want the same thing. So that willingness to figure out what's next is something that, and I don't want to say anything bad about Europe, but in many places people have become more complacent. And you don't have that here as much. And that's what I like about China. It's, as an entrepreneur, it's really where you can thrive.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before, and we vaguely described it as energy, but certainly, as you said, there's so many people motivated and into what's going on, and there's so much ambition. We talk about it in the intro to the podcast. It's just that it feels like, and when I return home again, I don't want to be down on Canada either. And then certainly there's pros and cons to both, but it just feels like when you're on the ground here, when you're on the street, when you're in a working environment, everyone kind of knows that they're in a unique time and it's not going to last forever in the way it is. And everyone kind of wants to, and that, that carrot is dangling in the air. Everyone knows the China story and knows the potential that it has for their respective businesses and companies. And it seems like they're just running as fast as they can to get that. Do you get that feeling as well? Or
yeah. No, I do, and you just need to learn to run very fast. I think that's the biggest challenge.
Right. Very competitive here.
It's very competitive, but it's also, whenever you think you figured it out, I mean, the next day you figured out that you didn't.
Does LetsFace have competitors here, either local Chinese companies or Western companies?
Of course, we have some competition. Very often, there's competition from, as I said, digital agencies, right, that come up with other solutions. On the other hand, the competition overseas is bigger than the competition in China.
I see.
So I think we don't encounter too much competition in the total platform and solution that we provide. It's more on an individual product base.
Right.
So if there's like one product, like a lucky draw, for example, somebody else has another digital lucky draw, then we will compete on that one product.
Right. But as a holistic experience, there's no one that really provides the level of
not in China that I have encountered. I mean, some companies come close in the number of products they have, but not so much in the platform they provide.
Right.
If you look at companies overseas, yes, that's a little bit different. So there's a number in Europe and in the US that actually are in the same level, but then they focus usually on one specific industry. Very good in conferences, for example. There's quite a number of conference solutions out there.
Right. Well, I've got to think that, having been here so long and really being in on the ground floor in this type of service, in this industry, you've got a very bright future and a few steps ahead of any competitors that might come by later on. Now, I wanted to ask you about something. I saw a picture of your office on your website, and I noticed there was a beer tap and a bunch of people drinking beer and cheersing in the middle of your office. Now, I noticed it was a Vedette draft tap, so I see you're staying true to your Belgian roots. But you don't see too many beer taps in too many offices. I certainly wish I had one in mine. What's the story behind that?
Well, the story is, first I'm Belgian, and so I think that's where it starts. I love beer, and I want to promote it as much as possible. It started a few years back with Kaiba and some other beer bars that came along. But for me, it's always been part of the Belgian culture, and I think it's important for me to share some of that with anyone that actually I come in contact with, whether it's the staff that really enjoys it, that, as you said, but also our clients, our partners, suppliers. A lot of people just come by, have a beer, and it just it makes it a lot easier to have people talk to you.
Right.
So it's a lot more casual, and you have it next to the office. So that means that the big benefit as a startup for us was that we got more clients coming to us than we had to go to the clients.
It's brilliant.
And in a way, it saves a lot of time and money as well. But it was a good experience.
It's probably a very worthwhile investment if looked at from that angle. But I'm sure the staff appreciate it from their own perspective as well.
No, I must say that it's only open after 6 p.m. because we don't want to have the staff drinking the whole day, of course. So it's pretty.
Well, if anything, it's a good way to keep the staff there working late.
Yes.
And as I mentioned, the draft is Vedette. Is there any chance of doing some sort of event with Vedette in China? I know they're growing in popularity.
Yeah, we're working closely with Moordgat and also Van der Geten, which are two big suppliers of Belgian beers in Shanghai or in China.
Great.
So Moordgat has about 12 different beers, and I hope I don't get the count wrong, but and I think Van der Geten has probably 70 different beers.
Wow.
So we have close cooperations and actually are working with them also in the bars that they do. So one of the things, if I may so, that we did recently was we made a beer coaster, which we put in a lot of bars on Yongkang Road to actually attract people to come and work for us. And so it was free beer, or don't pay for beer anymore, and then you could apply on the coaster in the back and send it in, and then we would look at your resume.
Now, those are the kind of things you want to see from a creative agency, for sure. And you'll have to send me some tickets to those beer events if you do any in the future. That sounds great. So we're coming up on the end of the show. Before we close it down, I wanted to get your perspective. You know, this whole podcast is about the startup and technology scene in Shanghai and to China to a lesser extent. But it's from my point of view, it seems like a bit of a different vibe from startup scenes in other places around the world. You know, having been here for as long as you have and being in the industry you're in, you know, what's your take on the startup scene, how it's growing, the interest in it, the infrastructure in terms of funding and, you know, human resources, capital and things like that? You know, what's the status of it and where do you see it heading in the future?
Well, quickly, I do believe that there's many more people now that want to be part of a startup, both from founding one as well as from wanting to join one.
Yeah.
And this has been a recent, maybe 5 years development. In the last years, you could see it a lot. So even people coming from overseas to China to be part of something new. That, I think, is a big difference now for the entrepreneur and the founder who wants to set up something. I don't think it's much easier than 10, 15 years ago or 10, 12 years ago. It's just different.
Right.
So I think it's easier to find foreign clients here. It's easier to find staff, especially foreigners, if you want to hire them. And we do. But it's also easier to connect because of the events and other opportunities that was more Chinese 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
So it's a more international environment, especially in Shanghai, which gives you more opportunity to find your focus, find your niche, and so on.
Right.
But the difficulty hasn't gone away because now you have a lot more competitors, you have a lot more tools that people have to make it. So it's people can set up a startup without a lot less money. So it's a lot more challenging to make your mark. So I think it was easier 10, 15 years to be noticed.
Right.
Now it's more difficult, but at the same time, there's more things around to make it happen.
Right. And as we discussed briefly before the show, you know, there are a lot of foreign VCs entering the market here. And again, we talk about the ecosystem and the infrastructure for startups. But you were saying that they are primarily interested in Chinese-owned and Chinese, developed companies, primarily directed towards the Chinese market.
Yes.
And so in terms of finding funding for maybe foreign-founded companies here, you've got to, perhaps search elsewhere.
Yeah, it's that's the strategy we had. At the start, like 4 years ago, I really approached quite a number of investors locally and asked very simple question. Whether they were investing in foreign entrepreneurs, and everybody said yes. But then when I asked how many have you, very few actually did invest in more than one, and usually it was in a later phase, or it was because they had a very good relationship with that person for one reason or another.
Right.
So I decided early on not to spend too much of my effort in trying to convince local venture capitalists, whether they're foreign or Chinese, but local in China, to invest in LetsFace.
Right.
So from the very start on, I looked for overseas investment, and then you find a lot of investors that aren't here yet, but that see China as a huge opportunity, and either they just want to try something out, or they basically it's aligned to one of their other business, which is in Asia, so they see it as an opportunity to do more things here.
Right.
So there's always investors outside China that are looking at China in some kind of interest. And that's where, as a foreigner, it's much easier to convince them to invest in you.
I see.
And that was my strategy, which worked out.
Right. So perhaps for those foreign founders that are looking to raise money with a startup or a business in China, going to those VCs that are outside of China that are interested in gaining a foothold in some way is a more, is an approach more likely to have success than approaching the VCs that are actually here and really on the scene looking for local domestic companies.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I think it depends on the stages. So if it's very, very early stage, maybe you can find a personal, a friend or an angel investor that wants to just take a shot at it.
Right.
But once you want to go in larger sums of capital, I think it's better to go back home basically and try and look for it there.
I see. All right. Before we're just coming up on the end of the show, but before we let you go, there's two questions we always ask our guests. The first one is, and perhaps extra relevant to LetsFace, because I saw from your website you're looking at hiring some new people to further your expansion. What are 3 pieces of advice that you would give a young person or even an older person who's come to China or considering coming to China and Shanghai to get involved in the startup and tech industry, whether that's to found a business or to get involved with a company like yours? What are 3 pieces of advice that you think would help them on their way?
I think don't try to change China. I think that would be one of the things that I...
Excellent advice. I've never heard that one. But
yes, because it's not going to happen. I've tried it. I also think if you want to compete, try not to compete with Chinese. So basically, they're always faster, they're always cheaper in providing services. So you have to differentiate yourself with some innovation or some other way to get noticed. So I think these were 2 advices that I would definitely see. I have another one which is pretty much about thinking. So there's always this saying like, think global, act local.
Right.
And I have a very strong opposition of that when it comes to China. So I actually believe you should do the exact opposite. So instead of thinking global, you should really think more local, but act global. That's why you go and look for VCs outside. Maybe go and look for employees outside.
Right.
Go and look for markets even outside China. So you have to look at what's out there. That's my strategy.
And even clients, and that's how you've secured some of your local clients.
Yes, so go and look for global clients.
Right.
Go and look for global markets. Go and look for global employees
Right.
that want to come here from China. And then think local. That basically means that you need to have the benefits of China to compete with everybody else.
Sure.
So that's try to get a cost-effective way. Try to get basically fast products turnaround. One of the things that I also have as an advice very often, which I did, is in the West they always tell you have to focus to succeed. And I actually think most Chinese companies diversify to succeed. So they have many different either products or industries or something like that. And that's what we did with LetsFace. We're focused on the industry, but we have many, many products as a platform.
Right.
And so there's always something that somebody likes. Focus is dangerous in China if you don't have the capital to make it happen.
Right. Well, that's great advice. And once again, China is turning things on their heads and forcing people to think and act differently here. So final question, changing it up again, in terms of advice you've received, just that regarding working, living, anything regarding here in Shanghai and China, what's the best piece of advice you've received throughout your career that has helped you in some way, has allowed you to have the proper perspective, has, just something, the best piece of advice that's benefited you on your journey here?
Well, there's not just one. There's many,
yeah.
But I think just there's 2 things. There's practical advice, and then there's more emotional advice, like things like take it day to day.
Right.
So don't get too hang up with what's happening, because it's going to change tomorrow anyway again. So I think a lot of people that have advised me that knew China even before I was here, they advised me just to go with the flow,
Right.
And don't try to fight it. And I think that's something that I've learned to do over time and just adapt to the situation. From a more pragmatic point of view, there's advice like your first hire should be your accountant. You just make sure you get some people around you that you trust. Try to find the right partners. But these are things you find in books. But for me, I've always said you should somehow make your business very rational here. So try to find the right people on the right spot quickly, and then be emotional about what you want to build.
Right. Well, I think that's great advice. I mean, having lived here for a few years myself, you can't fight the stream here in China. Going with the flow is fantastic advice, and just trying to, in that flow, develop something, have the life that you want. And I certainly think it's available here. It's just a matter of finding your niche, finding your way of doing it, and then really going for it like everybody else is. So thank you so much for joining us today, Pascal. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. LetsFace sounds like a very interesting business and company, and I'm sure I'll interact with your products and services and experience in the not too distant future at some of the events ongoing here in Shanghai. So where can people get a hold of you or LetsFace if they want to learn more about you guys?
The easiest is, and thanks for having me first, but the easiest way is actually just our website, letsface.com, so letsface.com. And then you can find our address where our bar is, so you know the way to the bar, and all the information is normally on the website. So.
Great. And are you guys also across social media in China?
Oh yeah, of course. This is the most important, and my marketing manager would kill me not saying this. But no, we are on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and also WeChat, Weibo, and so on. So you can find us on
everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere these days, yes.
Great. And we are Tech in Shanghai. You can find us on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai, and of course up on iTunes. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai for everything tech from Shanghai and China. See you next time.